What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Wednesday night Mythic Conversations. Took a week off last week to kind of recharge my batteries and spend a little time away. First time I've actually been away on a vacation since the start of COVID. So it was really, really nice to just get out of the house for a bit. But I missed you all. And I am back tonight with another episode. Actually had to pivot a little bit. So I had a plan for an interview tonight to have some guests on with me, and it didn't pan out, but that's okay. That's going to work out fine. Actually, we're going to work on that for hopefully next week. So next week's show is shaping up to be something really, really big, but in doing that and opening up the schedule for tonight, there was something that I had wanted to do for a while. It was a topic that I thought would be a lot of fun. Specifically, I call it a Knight's Tale, looking at some different knight customs. One of the most popular kinds of figures in the Mythic Legions line. It'll be fun tonight. Do a little bit of show and tell, show you some of the different knight customs that I've done over the years to hopefully help inspire you to make some of your own creations. Cool enough? Thank you for everyone who joins. Let's get this started like we do every single week with welcome to Mythic Conversations. I am your host, a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. My name is Jeremy Gerard. I also have the distinct privilege of being the digital marketing manager for Four Horsemen Studios. That means that all the content that you see at Source Horseman is content that I help to bring you. If you want to see more of my work, including actually a lot of the customs that we're going to look at tonight, you can certainly check me out on Instagram. That's at Mythic Customs, all one word, or on my website where I like to post lots of pictures, recipes of all the customs that I do, www.mythiccustoms.com. Of course, I'm also here every single Wednesday night live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for Mythic Conversations, the weekly Mythic Legion show where we talk about Mythic Legions news, Mythic Legions customizing, and we engage. We have a conversation. That's why it's called Mythic Conversations. There is a chat in your window there. So throughout the evening, if you have comments about what I'm talking about, if you have questions about what I'm talking about, hit me up in the comments. I will do my best to answer those questions throughout the evening. Tony's saying, gather round, kids. Uncle Jeremy's on. Tony, thank you very, very much for joining. Thank you to everyone, but especially to my buddy Tony there. Uncle Jeremy appreciates your support every single week, my friend. So let's start with Mythic Legions news. Unfortunately, the first thing that I do want to address is a bit of unfortunate news that happened last week while I was away. I got news like we all did of the untimely passing of a wonderful artist named Robson Rocha, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Those of us who are in the Mythic Legions community, we had certainly admired his artwork. It would be disingenuous for me to say that I was a good friend of his. I was not a good friend of his. I knew him. We communicated a number of times, and we were mutual fans. Little story, when I first saw some of his Mythic Legions fan art that he had posted, and I can't remember, I think actually Walter Hagen from the Mythic Legions Cabal had reposted some of his Mythic Legions fan art. And that's where I saw it for the first time. And I reached out to him because I do, manage everything and write all the content for Source Horseman. I reached out to him and I said, hey, I love your work. Really great. Would you like to do an artist spotlight on Source Horseman? And many people have said this after his passing through, remembering their interactions with him, but he was such just a nice guy and he's so incredibly humble. I was reaching out to him thinking that he was just a fan artist, that he was just someone who was incredibly talented, that was doing some Mythic Legions fan art. And as I'm talking to him, we got pretty deep into the conversation before he even mentioned that he was a professional comic artist working for DC Comics, working on Aquaman and a number of other books. And I think it was because I mentioned something about selling his art or maybe doing work for the studio. And he mentioned, well, I don't know if I could do that. I'm currently under contract with DC. I have an exclusive contract with them. And I was like, what? And that was how I discovered that he was actually a professional working comic artist. He was so incredibly humble. But he reached out and we started exchanging messages. And I was touched that he was a big fan of my work as well. He really, really loved the critters. So I had sent him a couple surprises in the mail. I had painted up one of the kitsune heads. He really liked the kitsunes. So I painted up a kitsune head and I sent it to him. He lived in Brazil. So I sent it to him in Brazil. And he surprised me in a couple ways. When we did the interview for Source Horseman, he sent me a number of images to use, both some of his Mythic Legions fan art and some of his DC Comics art. And one of the pieces that he sent me was actually his interpretation, his art of one of my characters as one of the kitsunes. And it blew me away. And if that wasn't amazing enough, I then a few weeks later get a surprise in the mail, and he actually sent me the piece of fan art. And I shared this the other day on my channels, my Instagram, but I'm going to share it here as well for everyone to look at. So this was the piece of fan art that he did for me, which, I mean, it's such a gorgeous piece. I'll zoom in a little bit. It's amazing. The black kitsune I did, which I had put on the Shadow Elf Ranger body. You can see here that he's got those gauntlets and those folds that the Shadow Elf Ranger has, along with my kitsune head that I painted. And just what an incredible gift to get in the mail, and just evidence of what a generous, warm person he was. So to hear about his passing, obviously the entire Mythic Legions community had an outpouring of tributes. Walter shared his art. The kind of cover photo on the Cabal throughout all the last few weeks has been different pieces of artwork that he has. A few pieces of that art were ones that I didn't even have in the original article. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to add those to the original interview with him, kind of as a tribute. But I didn't feel right starting tonight without just acknowledging the passing of this wonderful person. Obviously, he leaves behind a wife and a daughter. My thoughts go out to them, and to all of us in the community that he leaves behind. It's just proof that you never know how much time we have. I saw something the other day that someone said, everyone you meet in this world, there will be a last time that you meet them. So you never know when that time is. You never know when an interaction with someone is the last one you're going to have, which really made me think about the importance of not being petty, not giving into drama, and just enjoying the time that we all have together here. And certainly I enjoy the time that I have with all of you here each week. So again, my thoughts go out to you. You'll be greatly missed. I hope to see you in better days somewhere else, my friend. So moving along, again, started on a bit of a somber note, but had to cover that. ZoloCon. So this past weekend was ZoloCon in Pennsylvania. I unfortunately could not be there. As I mentioned, I was away for the week, and telling my wife that I had to cut our first vacation in a couple of years short so I could drive to Pennsylvania. That probably wouldn't have been a very wise decision on my part. So I elected to unfortunately miss that event. Now, I did hear that it was a wonderful time. Yeah, and people are saying right here, what a good time. ZoloCon was amazing. Yeah, that's exactly what I heard. Cornboy also couldn't be in attendance. Cornboy was also out at a wedding, I believe. So he wasn't there. Chris also didn't make the trip as well. But lots of people did. Eric and Jim were both there. Bill Mancuso from the studio was there. Walter flew in all the way from California to be part of ZoloCon as well. And then lots of Legionnaires descended on, that event to be a part of the Mythic Legions experience. I'm not going to lie. I was definitely following it online during the event. I was seeing all the pictures. I was very jealous to not be a part of it. And it just made me even more excited for what's going on with Legions Con, which is now less than 4 months away. Like, that blows my mind. My partner Joe and I have been talking all this week about some Legions Con plans. Crazy is we haven't even put out a call for like exhibitors to say like, hey, we've got tables to fill. All the tables we've filled have been from the only people we really reached out to were some of our previous exhibitors at past Legions Cons. And then we had a number of people that reached out to us, but we are already almost at capacity in terms of vendors, which is absolutely insane. Certainly the guest list is up at legionscon.com, so you can check that out. It's already an incredibly impressive array of guests that are going to be part of that event and part of Mythic Weekend. So we're super, super excited for that. And there's more information to come. We're starting to plan out now or all the logistics in terms of, what tickets are going to look like and what the layout of the floor is going to look like, how we control traffic flow. Lots of stuff to work out, but I'm super excited for the way it's shaping up. And like I said, ZoloCon had me really excited. Yeah, Steven saying it's going to be epic, and then Trevor saying the tacos were good. That was one of the things that I was definitely jealous about, seeing that like Legionnaire lunch and seeing you guys all get to go out for lunch together. That made me really jealous, and it reinforced one of the things or the decisions that we made for Legions Con. And I'm going to obviously talk a lot more about Legions Con in the months to come as we lead up. But one of the things that I think was really important was Legions Con is technically a 2-day event. It is the Saturday and the Sunday, but there's nothing really going on formally on Saturday. I'm probably going to pull some people aside and do some interviews. So anyone that can't travel to the event that wants to tune in online, I do want to bring the global audience some content across that weekend. So that's one of the things we're going to do Saturday. But one of the pieces of feedback that we got from artists and exhibitors in the past was that, when you're doing an exhibit, when you're behind the exhibit table, you're like working. And the only people you can engage with are those who come to your table. So you don't have any control over who you see, and other exhibitors, you really can't engage with them unless they're side by side. They're on one of your sides. So we know that everyone who's exhibiting is a fan. They're a part of this community and they want to engage as well. So that's why Saturday was scheduled to be a very flexible day, a meet and greet type day. So that Legionnaire lunch that you guys did down in Pennsylvania, people can do stuff like that. They can get, plans to go out to lunch, to go out to dinner. They can hang out and talk at the show in the parking lot. ToyCon is going on Saturday. I know a lot of us, it's a separate event, it's separate admission, but it's cheap to get. It's $15 to get in. I know a lot of people are going to be there milling about and having a lot of fun in advance of the Sunday, which is when it hits the fan and everyone is going to have an absolute blast. So very, very cool. Joe saying a busy 4 days. Joe, I'm so excited for it. From intern for a day to G-Con to Legions Con, and for the first time ever, I will let you in on a little secret. I'm actually traveling to New Jersey the day before Intern for a Day. So Intern for a Day is the Thursday. I'm traveling Wednesday morning to New Jersey, which means Mythic Conversations that night. My plan is to broadcast live from Four Horsemen Studios right before Mythic Weekend officially kicks off. So Mythic Conversations can be the official basically the Mythic Weekend pre-show. So I'm super excited about that. I haven't announced that anywhere yet, but that's something to look forward to in the next few months. Very, very cool. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Yeah, Joe, I can't wait for all of that either. It's going to be a ton of fun. So that's the stuff that I have going on. Not much other news. Not much other news to report. Doesn't it? Is it just me? Doesn't it feel like calm? Like it's calm right now in Mythic Legions and Four Horsemen Studios world. It's the calm. It's been quiet lately. I mean, the in-stock sales are on pause. So Chris had posted, last week that as they were preparing for ZoloCon, he was going to put a little bit of a pause on the in-stock sales. They'll resume again sometime in August, but that made a lot of sense to put a little pause on that so they can focus on some other things. But it seems quiet right now. Yeah. Savage G, calm before the storm. We'll have to see, right? We'll have to see. So, like I said, hit me up in the chat if you have things you want to talk about. I do have a topic at hand tonight. It is a little looser than some of my weeks because, like I said, kind of put it together a little bit hastily. But I did want to do a show about knights. So I've done shows about orcs. I've done shows about goblins, vampires. And in looking at the different kinds of races of mythos, knights aren't a race in the same way that an orc or a vampire or a goblin is. Technically, there can be a variety of races underneath those helmets, and they've certainly even used that in the official storyline. I posted an article on Source Horseman this week, a new series that I'm calling The Lore of Mythos, where I'm going to delve in. I know we all love to talk lore, right? I'm going to delve into more of the storylines and factions and so forth that have been presented so far for Mythic Legions, similar to what I did on my show a couple episodes ago. But I started, of course, with my favorite faction, the Sons of the Red Star. And in that write-up that I did, I talked about those Dark Templars, which are part of the deluxe Legion Builders wave that was offered somewhat recently. And I referred to the fact that if you look on the website where it says race, it says various. And I remember talking to Eric Treadaway before we posted those, that wave. And, the question was, okay, what, because some of them I know, the barbarian, the race is human, the gladiator, theoretically, he's got a helmet on, but he looks human. So there are some that are pretty obvious. The goblin, the race is goblin, the dwarf, the race is dwarf. But the Dark Templar being fully armored, having that helmet on, you don't really know what race it is. So Sons of the Red Star having so many skeletons in that faction already. I mean, I say so many, it's such a small faction, but we've got a number of skeletons. I wasn't sure if the Dark Templars were skeletons. And when he told me they were various, and he said the idea is that there can be all different races that are part of this Dark Templar fighting force, basically, this army that they have, but they all wear the same uniform. And I loved that. I was like, that is such a cool idea. So being able to put various for their race was really, really neat. So when you think about knights, they're not really a race because anything could be under that helmet. But I don't really I guess I could call them a class and a character class if I'm going and thinking like in terms of old school Dungeons and Dragons, maybe carry they're knights, they're fighters, whatever. Regardless, knights since the inception of the line have been an important and popular part of Mythic Legions. I remember a lot of fans really early on, what drew them into Mythic Legions was largely one of two things, knights and skeletons. And it was because when these figures came out 6 years ago, we really didn't have any good knight figures, like this scale knight figure or this scale skeleton figure. Since Mythic Legions has been released, I've seen other companies doing skeletons. The ones from Storm Collectibles, from, was it Golden Axe? Are they from Golden Axe? The skeletons. I know they have a bunch of different colors that they've done over the years. But those are some skeleton figures, certainly, and they're totally naked, for lack of a better term, unlike the Mythic Legion skeletons where they're fully armored. They've got, nothing on. They're just a pure bone skeleton. But those have come out since Mythic Legion. So going back to that first Kickstarter, I remember the community, I remember the chatter, and people, they really, really seemed to love the skeletons and the knights. Those were really what they gravitated towards. And even looking at newer waves that have come out, I can tell you that the skeletons and the knights are always some of the best sellers. They're always some of the most popular figures when it comes to fan votes and what have you. Those are very popular figures. So knowing that, I thought, you know what? Let me look at some different knight customs that I've done. And I was actually surprised at how many knight customs I've done over the years, because I wouldn't say they're my favorites. Like, while I understand why a lot of people really like the knights, the reality is when the first Mythic Legions wave was solicited, the knights were some of my least favorite figures. I've said this before, but I wasn't super into Legion builders up front, because remember, when Mythic Legions 1.0 was solicited, I wasn't customizing. I love Legion builders from the customizing standpoint now, but back then I looked at them and I said, well, yeah, they're a lower price point figure, but the ones with all the paint applications look so wonderful, I'd rather get those. Now, I got all the Legion builders early on because I did buy I bought multiple all-ins, so I got them all, but I can tell you that I was never a big fan of the Gold Knight Legion builder or the Silver Knight Legion builder. Even some of the name knights, Sir Gideon Heavensbrand was a figure that I really didn't care for. I expected that once I got him in, I was going to sell him, that I was going to just flip him and not want him. He turned out to be one of my favorite figures in that first wave. He's a wonderful, just gorgeous looking figure. Sir Ignatius with his pearlescent armor. It's been said many times that figure did not translate well into photos. When you got it in hand, it looked just great, which is why so few people ordered him as part of the initial Kickstarter. But then when everything shipped and people saw better photos, everyone wanted them, but supply and demand, right? Not a ton of people order it, means there's not a ton to go around in the secondary market. It's one of the reasons why Sir Ignatius became one of the original Mythic Legions All-Stars, because he was so underproduced and in such high demand right after the Kickstarter, along with Sir Gideon and Orange Steelhide, all figures that weren't produced in huge numbers that made it into that first All-Stars wave to help meet demand. So I loved these knights once I got them in hand, but they initially weren't some of my favorites. I really like the dwarves a lot more. I like the orcs a lot more. I like the skeletons. Those were some of the figures early on that I really gravitated towards. So I was kind of surprised with how many knight customs I've done over the years, but they are a really fun kind of character to make different customs with. So I'm going to show you some of my customs now, and we'll talk through all this. Before I do that, I'm just going to check. I do see a lot of comments are coming in, so let me see what people are saying. Let's see. So Anthony's saying, I like Wednesday nights. Very good. He had to drop that. I talked to Anthony on the phone earlier today, and he said that same joke. So I was expecting that. Any word on the Legion Builder vote? I was talking to CB about it today. Expect an announcement very, very soon. Let's see. Can't wait for my Skeleton Legion builders. Yeah, I think a lot of people are waiting to refuel their ranks there. I need more dwarves in my life. Yeah, I just told you, I always liked the dwarves. They were some of the ones I liked right from the beginning. Otho was that way too, right? Yeah, Otho very underproduced, but unlike the other figures that became all-stars, he was just never popular. Like, a little side note, right after the figure shipped, those underproduced figures like Sir Ignatius, Orange Steelhide, they were super popular. Everyone wanted them, and they were just none to be found. And then other figures that were popular, like the Barbarian Builder set, that was popular and was made in some of the largest numbers in that wave. That might have been the most popular figure in that wave, if I'm not mistaken. Yet there still wasn't enough to go around because everyone wanted extras. That is why the first All-Stars wave was the first one that, I should say, the only one that fans didn't vote on. That was assembled by the studio. Otho, for as popular as he is today, wasn't popular really during the Kickstarter, nor after the figures really shipped. It wasn't until much more recently, the last couple of years, I would say, that the popularity of Otho and even like Azar, the Yellow Demon, those are figures that early on I did not see a lot of people clamoring to get those figures. Clavian, the Red Skeleton, a lot of those figures early on, they just weren't super popular. Now today, they're terribly, terribly hard to find. Obviously, Otho is kind of the grail that a lot of people hold up. But yeah, he was definitely not heavily ordered in that first wave, but never became popular. What a lot of people are surprised to hear, the vote for All-Stars 3 and All-Stars 4 was a limited roster of characters. The studio said, okay, these are the, 18 or 20, whatever it was, figures that fans can vote on. What a lot of people are surprised to hear is the All-Stars 2 vote, which was the first time they ever allowed fans to vote for the All-Stars wave, literally included everything. Like Gorgo was in that vote. Otho was in that vote. Ilgar was in that vote. Unkin was in that vote. All of these figures that today people are just amazed that they just can't believe that they haven't been reproduced. Interestingly, if it shows you how the popularity of the line and the figures people are hunting for have changed over time, Boggoblin made it into All-Stars 2 based on the fan vote, and Otho didn't. So that's a little bit of an interesting kind of history, I guess, of the way some of those fan votes went. Yes, Sir Ignatius was an all-star in that very first wave. That first wave, the all-stars were Sir Gideon Heavensbrand, Sir Ignatius, Asterion the Minotaur, which is another one I know a lot of people want another shot at. My friend Trevor, 1/6 shooter, I know he really, really wants one. Barbarian Legion Builder, Orange Steelhide, and Scapular the Crypt Breaker. He was an all-star as well. Okay, so let's talk about Knights. So some of the first things I did with Knights, some of the first customs I did when I really got started customizing, long before the 3D parties were out there. Today, we have so many options for 3D companies. There are so many wonderful creators out there making heads that we can add on to these figures. I think about Emil Wickman and Steve, Lord Steven, in their God's Fire series. So their God's Fire series are tailor-made to put on Knight bodies. They specifically made them with the Templars in mind. They have a storyline around their God's Fire series. So popping off that bucket helmet that the Templar comes with and putting this head on gives you a really cool look for these Knights. Because a lot of the Knights, remember, don't come with their faces being seen. A lot of them have the bucket helmet or the jousting helmet. So giving them an actual face, you can even kind of tuck the helmet under their arm like they're holding it. That provides a really cool look. And that was some of the first stuff that I ever did for Mythic Legions, was taking some of these figures and just popping heads, not from third-party companies, but from other lines on them. And early on, what were the lines that I really, really focused on, definitely started with Masters of the Universe Classics. So I've said this before, but Masters Classics, because they were sculpted by Four Horsemen Studios, always felt like a really good line for me to use with Mythic Legions. It felt like a sister line, right? Some of the figures, like I grew up with Masters of the Universe. So while I wasn't a Masters Classics fan, ironically, I did have Masters and I still have Masters figures in my display, but I really loved the 2000X redesign that the Four Horsemen did. While they're not the best toys, the articulation is not where I would love it to be. I love the aesthetic that they did on those. So I still have those in my collection. And because of that, I didn't go heavy into Masters Classics. The only Masters Classics figures that I really got, Motu Classics, was figures that either they weren't made in 2000X, or I could add them to the display that I had as other characters. That's really where I focused. But when it started to go to customizing, I didn't want to put like a He-Man head on these figures because I know who He-Man is. I recognized him. But there were a ton of characters who I had no idea who they were. And the sculptures were really, really good. I remember there's a character called Decker that I had no idea who Decker was. I don't remember him from the cartoons, if he even was in the cartoons. I loved that head on a Mythic Legions figure. Count Marzo is another one that I have no idea who that character is. I loved that head. And then this was one that I put very early on that I thought looked great. And let me find it here. This was my kind of Prince custom. So I did this custom to really create like a prince for one of my kingdoms. In my own personal mythos, I imagine there being different kingdoms throughout the realm of mythos. And one of them in my head, I referred to as the Kingdom of Little Falls. Now, if you know where Four Horsemen Studios is, it is located in Little Falls, New Jersey. So I liked that name, Little Falls. I thought that worked really well in a fantasy type setting. So I imagine there being a Kingdom of Little Falls, and this was the prince of that kingdom. Now, this head comes from a Masters Classics figure whose name is, I believe, Bo, B-O-W. Now, Bo, my understanding, and Lord Stephen will certainly correct me if I get this wrong, I believe Bo is from the She-Ra Princess of Power line. So that is something that I know virtually nothing about. So it would make sense that I was not familiar with this character to begin with. But the sculpture itself, the way it looks, I thought worked really, really well on this body. And let's talk about that body for a minute, because I think that's an interesting story here as well. That is a Knight Legion, I say Legion, a Knight Builder pack. So after the success of that big barbarian pack that I just mentioned, when they were doing the Covenant of Shadows wave. So after Mythic Legions 1.0, which included the barbarian, we got the 1.5 wave, which was a very small wave. 4 figures plus the 2 trolls were first solicited in 1.5. We got the All-Stars wave. We got the Aetheron's Dozen wave. But the first bigger wave that we got, the first kind of themed wave, was called Covenant of Shadows. That is an interesting wave because we didn't know it at the time, but it was starting to set the stage for some of the lore that would come for Mythic Legions. And I talked about this on the show specifically around Mythic Legions lore. I'm going to take this down for a minute. What I talked about is, what's happening in Mythic Legions now, especially with the G-Con waves, starting with Aether into Alithia, where we're starting to see these dark gods from the realm of mythos emerge. Well, before those dark gods that had been banished for, ages started to emerge, there was the Covenant of Shadow. And that was the storyline around that wave, where representatives from the 4 evil factions, the Circle of Poxus, Legion of Aether, Alithia's Brood, and Convocation of Necronominus, they each sent a representative to this secret meeting to talk basically about the rise of their dark gods. I didn't realize it at the time. I remember that wave. I didn't realize that there was an evil character from every one of those factions. It just totally flew over my head until more recently when I started digging into the lore. But that's how it started. Now, in addition to those members who attended the Covenant of Shadow, there were also some heroic figures that were released in that wave. And one of them was the studio's second builder pack. So we had that barbarian pack, which was basically, the idea here is it was a base figure and it came with a ton of accessories. Lots of figures come with an extra head. The builder packs, and don't confuse Legion builders, which is a product category for the figures that have fewer paint applications offered at a lower price. I wish they wouldn't use the same terminology because it does make it confusing, but Legion builders and builder packs are different things. Builder packs are these large figures. They've done 3 of them so far. Actually, I stand corrected. They've released 3 so far. The builder packs from the video game, from the Mythic Legions Tactic video games, are this same product category. They're these large packs that come with a figure and a number of accessories, not only extra heads, but in some cases extra torsos, extra shoulder armor, like more than one set of shoulder armor, loin pieces, waist pieces, lots of weapons. They come with a ton of gear that you can really outfit not only the figure it comes with, you can certainly outfit your other figures as well if you're really looking for a lot of additional weapons, like an arsenal worth of weapons. It allows you to do some different builds on those. And the second one they did was this Knight Legion builder. He came not only with that cloth version tunic there, that kind of light blue. He also came with a chest that was an armored piece. And it's, again, when we talk about how much things have changed in Mythic Legions over the years, we were talking about Otho being not popular to being now a Grail find. I remember people complaining heavily about this figure, or this base figure, I should say, when it first came out. There were a lot of people that they just didn't like it. It didn't appeal to them. It used a lot of the same parts that they had already seen on figures from the 1.0 wave. I think a lot of people felt like, well, we've already got the different Knight Legion builders. We've got Sir Owain. We've got all these figures. This didn't offer much new in terms of product for them. Try to get one of these sets today, and outside of it being an expensive set, it's just terribly difficult to find. I always really liked it because of how unique the color of his tunic was. There's really nothing else. They haven't done any that are this color in the line since. I've actually used that torso piece and that cloth tunic piece on my Balaam Knight. So my Balaam figure, that purple armor, I think works really, really well with these colors here. So I've mixed and matched those. But this is one that I did really early on, where I just took that bow head, used a Dremel to Dremel it out, and popped this on. It's funny. I used to Dremel heads so frequently in those early days. Now that so much of the customs that I do have moved away from, Masters of the Universe Classics head, or just heads from other toy lines that need to be Dremeled, it seems like I just don't do that much anymore. There's not much of a call for me to have to do that. But this was a very early one. So I use this as a piece of inspiration, hopefully for you, that if you're looking to get started with customizing, this is one of the easiest things you can do. Get some third-party heads, whether it's other toy lines, whether it's some of the pre-painted heads that come. I mentioned Emil and Steven's God's Fire. Buy some painted versions of those. You pop on a Knight head. You put that helmet under the arm like you see here, and instantly you have yourself a pretty cool Knight figure. Another version that I did of that, building on this idea of those kind of builder packs, I guess, was this one that I did here, which is obviously my female knight. Now, this was one that I did obviously after Advent of Decay was shipped, because Advent of Decay is the first time that we got the female figures. One question I do have here: Overlord, no, that Knight Builder set has never been re-released. It's only had its one released, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to come by today. Roberto asking, have animal knights like Balaam help increase the popularity of knights? I think the knights were already so darn popular to begin with that I think that some people like the fact that they could buy the Balaam and, buy two, one to display as the, the cat head and one as the knight head. That's certainly how I have them displayed, but I think they're just popular to begin with. So back to this. This is what I did after Advent of Decay shipped, and it was part of the series that I've talked about a number of times on the line that I called my Mythic Princesses, basically, where they were inspired by classic Disney princesses. Obviously, the characters, the princess characters in the Disney stories themselves come from folklore and fairy tales and legends and so forth. Disney didn't create them from scratch. This was meant to be my interpretation of Cinderella. And once again, it uses a Masters of the Universe Classics head. I believe this was actually a Tila head that I thought worked really, really well on that body. There's no other real custom going on here. I gave her a cape. That's about it. But just like the one we just looked at, that Knight Builder Pack, that was Knight Builder Pack 1, essentially. This is Knight Builder Pack 2, which is the female Knight Builder Pack. So wonderful set, lots of really great weapons offered as part of Advent of Decay. I even believe some of these were sold this past weekend at ZoloCon, if I'm not mistaken. So there are still some of this set out there in the world. I know there were some sold at ToyCon New Jersey in May. Wonderful figure that if you're looking to create some female knights, I think is a great base figure to start with. So let's keep going and looking at a couple others here. So that was one of the first ways that I started. You could have a lot of fun just doing that. One that I want to show now was one I did early on. That's another really easy one to do, or was at the time, that also uses that same Knight Builder body. And that was my kind of tribute to the character of Strongheart. So, I've talked about this before. Dungeons and Dragons is a huge influence on my love of Mythic Legions. The years that I played the Dungeons and Dragons game certainly influenced me as a Mythic Legions fan and customizer. And even, additionally, in terms of the game, the original LJN figures that were released to support Dungeons and Dragons, those figures didn't necessarily represent the characters from even the cartoon, right? Because the cartoon was a totally different set of characters, but I loved those figures growing up. And we've seen so many people do their versions of Warduke. Obviously, the Rhaegor figures got a lot in common with Warduke. A lot of people use either the Barbarian set or the Rhaegor set, to create their not Warduke. There have been a number of people that have, third-party companies that have put out additional sculptures, heads, and weapons and so forth to create your Warduke. Well, Warduke's arch nemesis in that original LJN line was a character, heroic knightly character called Strongheart. And I always felt like that Sir Gideon Heavensbrand head had a very Strongheart-like feel to it. So that's what I did here. I created this kind of tribute. And again, it was meant to be a Mythic Legions version of the character as opposed to a perfectly 100% accurate. The reality is Strongheart has a very distinctive chest plate armor. I've seen some other people that have sculpted that and they look wonderful. Wasn't really what I was going for. So this one worked well for me. I've actually changed it up a little bit since then. I actually have him here. Ironically, I needed that that torso that he had in the original photos, that cloth torso. I needed it for something else. I don't even remember what now, but quite some time ago, after I took those photos, I needed that torso, and I happened to have one of the other torsos, the armored torso from that Night Builder set, in my fodder bin. So I just swapped them out. And after I did so, I ended up realizing I kind of like this look better anyway. I think it looks a little bit closer to the original source material. I just like the way the figure looks. But ultimately, all this is just that Night Builder body with the Sir Gideon Heavens brand head that I painted silver. And I really actually dig how that head looks in silver. Let me bring that graphic back up and I'll zoom in a little bit on it and we can look at that. Here we go. So the way that head looks in silver, I just think it's a really, I like that head anyway. It's like I said, at first wasn't a huge fan of this figure, this character, but now seeing that head, it has grown on me significantly. Interestingly, it's a head that hasn't been used very much. It's only appeared, besides the original Sir Gideon Heavens brand, it's only appeared one other time, and that's on the Lord Vatyrus figure. So it's a cool head. It's not, one they've utilized a lot, which allows it to still feel very, very fresh and very, very new. And I personally think it looks very cool in silver as well. So that's another idea, just taking some of those existing heads and swapping how they look. You can totally do that. Now, should point out here that I'm showing some figures and I'm showing parts. I'm saying, hey, this is a Night Builder Pack 1 and this is a Sir Gideon. And if you're newer to the line, you may be like, well, that's awesome, but those are terribly hard to find figures, so it's not practical that I could do those. I'm just showing these as examples that I've done over the years. I'm specifically starting with some of my older customs I've worked on. But there are a lot of figures that are out right now or readily available, somewhat readily available right now, that I think make wonderful Knight customs. Who am I talking about? Well, the Magnus figure is a great base to work with. This Golden Knight, obviously Magnus comes with two heads, the wonderfully expressive Magnus head, but if you can bring yourself to pull that head off and not use it, he also comes with this bucket helmet that just makes for a wonderful Knight custom, just Knight figure as is, but also a great armored base that you can use. Gold armor. So if you're not totally into gold armor, this is going to be problematic, but this is a great base figure that's part of Aerothere Wave. Aerothere Wave is still, they just had a ton of them at the ZoloCon. The in-stock sale for Aerothere is going to come out eventually. Big Bad Toy Store is still going to be getting in their shipment. So there's still a lot of Aerothere product left to ship. That figure is available. If you don't love the gold, the Red Shield Soldier is one of my favorite base figures to customize with. We're going to look at a custom that I used that base for shortly, but that's another figure that's somewhat available right now that's got a darker kind of grayish silver armor. That's a great base to use for customs as well. If you're thinking more female figures, the Hadriana figure is an amazing base body for Knights as well. Not only, I love this helmet here. I love that cat helmet. I love how it looks with the visor flipped up. But she also comes with that alternate kind of bucket helmet that works just wonderful as a more generic Knight figure. This is so unique. It is so, well designed. It really feels like a unique character. So if you're looking for something that's not as expressive, that's a little more generic, just the alternate head that it already comes with gets you there. And then you can just build off of that. What a great figure to use as a base. So when it comes to Knights, like there are some figures, like right now, there aren't a lot of dwarf figures out there. The Hellfire Goblin is a dwarf buck, but he's got the demon feet, he's got the bare hands. So you're going to have to replace those if you want to use that to make a dwarf. The other challenge with the Hellfire Goblin is if you pop the head off, there's no neck peg. So it's one of the only 2 figures in the line that doesn't come with a neck peg. The Bog Goblin and the Hellfire Goblin, the neck peg is actually integrated into the head itself. Even the Warrior figure, that figure, even though build-wise it looks really similar to the Bog Goblin, if you pull that head off, there's actually a dwarf-style neck peg in there. The Hellfire Goblin, the Bog Goblin don't have that. So they provide a little bit of a challenge. So there are dwarves coming. We're going to get some dwarf bucks very soon in the Deluxe Legion Builders wave. The Puglin has a dwarf buck essentially, and the actual dwarf. So they're going to be coming down the road. Absolutely. In the Alithia wave, Krotos, the Satyr, that's a dwarf buck. It's got the hooves, but still that's one there. And Varg is a dwarf buck as well. My point is that if you're thinking of knights, they are plentiful right now. They are out there. There's also, by the way, Baron Valiger from the All-Stars 3 wave if you're looking to make more of a Dark Knight or an Evil Knight. Let's see. Okay. Other things we're going to look at here. So I was talking about, some newer customs that I've done using some third-party pieces. Let's look at one of those right now. This is actually one that I posted today, and this is kind of a golden knight. So this is a custom head that I was recently sent by my good friend, the unfailingly generous Dennis Derby. He sent me this head recently. Now, it has come to my attention that this head is actually based off a character in the video game Dark Souls. I am not a gamer. You've heard me say that a number of times. So I am not familiar with this character. I just thought it was a cool looking head. I just liked the head. I thought it looked really neat. And it's interesting because the way that it actually fits, it works really, really well inside of the neck collar. So let me pause this for a second or just take that off and show you here. The way that this head works, I do have a neck peg here, but this head that he sent me, the hole in it, it's gigantic. Like it's so big. A lot of the 3D companies out there, they make the heads, they make the ports larger than the pegs. And there's a very logical reason for that. While I have some 3D heads that are what they call a pop fit, they pop right on. It's incredibly satisfying. It feels great. But the reality is 3D printed resin is not an exact, the measurements of these pieces are not the same. They're not exact the way that injection molded pieces would be. So the official heads that come off the production line from the factory in China, those are precise, right? Because of the way they're being produced. What I've discovered, what I've been told by my friends in the 3D printing community is just slight variances in from print to print to print can change the way that one of these head fits. And you wouldn't think that, a tiny little difference, tiny millimeters worth of difference, I guess, in that head socket would make such a difference, but it absolutely does. And understanding that resin can be somewhat fragile, making something that's got to be forced on could create a breakage. It's why a lot of 3D providers make their heads, make the ports a little large, and just require you to use blue tack to keep them on. It's pretty much a common thing that we all work with as customizers in this community. That all being said, this is huge. So I couldn't even put blue tack to keep it on. But what was interesting, what I found was if I used this particular collar, the rim of the neck fit so nicely inside of that is kind of what held it on. And I just loved the way that it looked. The way that it flowed, I thought looked really, really attractive. So this was one that I put together. And this is actually a Gold Knight Legion builder. So I mentioned that I didn't care for those figures at first because I liked the figures that had more paint applications. So that's essentially what I did here was I added a white loin from a Sir Gideon Heavens brand. And then I just painted the details on the gold armor to make it look, to give it the kind of paint applications that you would see on, basically a full standard, fully painted figure. So this is one that I just revealed today. Again, thank you very much to Dennis for that helmet that he gave me. I love the fact that I don't know what it's from, because I don't look at it like a lot of people, will see it and they'll say that it's, I love that Dark Souls head. For me, it's just a cool looking knight head, and that's more than enough reason to have it in my collection. Very cool there. Okay, so let's look at a few others we got here. What do we have next? I'm going to look at what I've got and see where we want to go. So this is a fun one. Let's look at this one next, because there's a fun story behind this one as well that hopefully you'll appreciate. So this is a figure that I did, and I actually gave this away recently. This is my version of a character called Dragon Blade. So on the left-hand side, you see my custom Dragon Blade. And on the right-hand side, you see the source material that I actually got it from. That is a figure, a vintage figure, I guess you could say. It's crazy for me to call old McFarlane Toys figures vintage at this point, but the reality is it came out quite a few years ago. So if you remember, the stories, the members of Four Horsemen Studio met during their time at McFarlane Toys. They were instrumental in the success of some of those early lines, those early Spawn lines. Well, after Spawn, McFarlane released the Spawn line out, and it became such a popular seller, in the action figure aisles. They started dipping their toes into other comic properties, things like Youngblood and Wetworks, and that led them to create their own in-house line of original designs. That line was called Total Chaos. So Total Chaos was a line, and it was the first line that McFarlane put out that were totally original designs. They weren't based on a comic book or anything like that. They were just cool toys. Now, when these figures came out, Spawn and the McFarlane Toys kind of portfolio, they were some of the first figures I ever collected. Spawn is really what turned me into a collector. And it's a big part of the reason why I, have followed Four Horsemen Studios' career, throughout the years. They've been such an important part of my collecting journey since the very, very beginning. I remember loving the Total Chaos figures. And this particular one, this knight known as Dragon Blade, was one that I had many, many years ago. I was sitting at, I believe it was the second G-Con. I was at the studio and I was listening to Bill Mancuso tell a story. So Bill is a member of Four Horsemen Studios. He's they refer to him as kind of the utility man, jack of all trades. He literally does a little bit of everything there. Ben, my favorite, was Poacher as well. I still have my Total Chaos Poacher figure. Absolutely love it. But I digress. Bill was telling a story. So Bill is a utility man there. Bill worked at McFarlane Toys as well. And I never realized this, but the Dragon Blade figure actually has a likeness of Bill Mancuso from Four Horsemen Studios. That is what this was designed to be. He basically sculpted his head on this character. Now, one of the funny things about this character, and it's might be a little tough for you to see, I'll zoom in a little bit, but you can see that Dragon Blade's right-hand side of his face, he's got a big scar and he's got kind of a dead white eye. And Bill was telling the story. I mean, they've joked, if you ever hear Four Horsemen tell stories about their time at McFarlane, they recall a lot of these experiences very fondly. But Eric will jokingly say that, a lot of those figures in the early days were known for being, not symmetrical. And even if you just look at this Dragon Blade design here, look at that collar around his neck. We've got like a weird shield on one side that's not reflected on the other. When we get to his arms, this one is a metal gauntlet with a big blade. The other one looks like leather straps. On his thighs, we've got one with a big blade, one without. On his legs, this one's got these big, blades. top to bottom, this figure is not symmetrical. And I've heard Eric jokingly talk about that saved them during those early days. The fact that Spawn had a giant boot on one foot and not on the other, a giant gauntlet on one wrist and not on the other, saved them because it allowed them during those early days. Remember, this was a time when everything was sculpted by hand. They weren't in ZBrush. They weren't able to just mirror what they were doing on one side to the other to get that symmetry across both sides. They had to sculpt it by hand. Eric has talked about the fact of how much time he used to spend just trying to make one side look like the other. So figures like Dragon Blade, I'm sure, made that easier. And I remember Bill telling the story, and I never knew. I had that figure, never knew it was based on Bill, and telling the funny story about how he originally had sculpted the head not to be all scarred, and how Todd McFarlane had looked at it and had immediately said, no, he needs more. He needs a big scar on his face. So Bill had to he had to kind of get more extreme with the sculpture there and put that in. So the story goes that after hearing Bill tell that story, I came back and said, you know, it would be a lot of fun to do a Mythic Legions version of the Dragon Blade. Knowing it was now based on Bill, I thought that would be a lot of fun. So that's what I did here. And it actually uses, let's see, the head that I did here, this uses a Marvel Legends Black Knight head. I'm not one to use a lot of Marvel Legends heads in my customs, but I thought this one worked. It's maybe a tad too small, but it worked okay for me. I did sculpt the Baird on it. One of the few customs I've ever done where I actually sculpted stuff onto it additionally. I just used some epoxy sculpt. I'm not a sculptor by any stretch of the imagination, but doing something that was somewhat simple like this facial here, I think I executed it well on this. Painted it up, and I actually used pieces from that Dragon Blade figure. So if you look at the tunic that he's wearing here, it is the same tunic. I bought a Dragon Blade figure so I could glue the Dragon Blade shield onto a Mythic Legion shield, and I could cut off some of those blades. So if you notice, this blade on his wrist here is the same blade on his wrist here. And you can't really see it, but he also does have these kind of leg blades. Those are on his leg as well. Even the piece around his neck is actually around his neck here as well. Interesting other aspect of this, you'll notice that sword that he is wielding. I wanted to create, the original McFarlane figure came with a large, crazy looking sword. So I wanted to give him a different sword. That piece that you are looking at there is the first ever 3D printed part that I painted. So I found that on Shapeways. And again, this was well before the 3D market really blew up for the Mythic Legions community. I found that on Shapeways and I brought that over. So I purchased that and brought that into this custom. And it was my first reaction to 3D printing. And it's funny to say this now, but I was terribly unimpressed. The quality of the material, it was gritty. Like it didn't have layer lines in it, but it was very, very gritty. It did not have the same type of feel, the same type of texture that you would see on a production like Mythic Legions piece, for instance. And that was my first impression of 3D printing, which is why later on down the road, when other companies started doing 3D printed parts, My Action Figure Customs were the first ones that I remember really offering 3D printed parts. And I remember seeing some of those early parts and was incredibly surprised by how smooth they were, how clean they were, how they integrated, and how good they looked when painted. That was incredible to me because this was my first impression, and really, the material of this sword to the material that I'm seeing 3D printers pump out today, absolutely night and day. But that's an interesting little story here for this night custom. And I guess it's another way that you could be inspired in your knight customs. Look at other figures out there, other knights. I've shown you being inspired by the old Strongheart figure from Dungeons and Dragons. Now I'm showing you being inspired by a Dragon Blade figure from McFarlane Toys Total Chaos line. So that's something else you can do, is if you have a knight figure from another line that you think is cool, consider giving it the Mythic Legions treatment. Cool? Awesome. So on the topic of different knight customs, one thing I think you can do, so far we've looked at pretty straightforward knights, I would say, right? Dragon Blade's a little bit of a crazy design because it's McFarlane, and as Will like to say, Todd wanted more sex in it, so got to make it sexy. But what other things you can do is kind of build on that idea of a knight. So just making very standard kind of knights is a lot of fun. Even just popping those new heads on, those unmasked heads, a lot of fun. But I think you can take it to another level. You can do some other things with knights. One of the early customs that I did was building on the idea of a knight to create what I guess you would call a sword mage or an eldritch knight. I've heard him referred to as both. And this is kind of a Dungeons and Dragons. Again, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s, right? Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That was the version I played. So I remember talking to someone that I work with who's a much younger person, who his Dungeons and Dragons was a newer edition than what I was used to. And he had played it much more recently. And I was asking him what type of class he plays. And he said a sword mage. And I said, what the hell is a sword mage? No idea what that is. Because my Dungeons and Dragons, you were a fighter, a magic user, a cleric, or a thief. That is literally all there was. Like, we didn't even have rangers at that point. Like, it was like 4 character classes. Now there are so many classes and subclasses and everything, which is awesome. I love the variety. But he explained to me that a sword mage was a character that uses both, he's a knight type character, a warrior type character that also uses magic. So I was like, that's kind of a cool idea. I like that thought. Someone who is armored, but, can also cast spells, because I remember back when I used to play, wizards were they were super powerful if you got to a higher level. But I remember early on, I was a young kid, it was all about hack and slash, right? So you just wanted to fight monsters. And having a wizard with, a knife and some spells was never as fun as being a fighter and just pulling out, a two-handed sword and just hacking away. That was a lot of fun. So an Eldritch Knight, a sword mage, was something I thought would be a lot of fun to create as well. And it was one of those design challenges. What would that look like? This is the character that I created. And this is actually a character that I've updated somewhat recently with the hands from that hand and feet pack. Those expressive hands, the fact that this is supposed to be a mage, having hands that look like he could be casting a spell, I really think adds a lot to this. But I like the way this look, and that uses a custom head. Again, I've shown this a number of times. That's a custom head from Kurt Daniels. Started out life as a WWE Sting figure from the Create a Superstar line that he repainted. But this combination of a wizard robe and wizard staff and those spell casting hands, along with that armored body and even that loin piece, which comes from a Spawn Viking Age figure. I really like the way that made this character look. And it's another way that you can think about making variations on your knights. Everyone doesn't have to be a Templar. Everyone doesn't have to be a knight about to enter a jousting tournament. You can build on that idea of knights and create some really cool, different looks, I think, as well. So on that note, here's another thing that I did, and this was one of the more controversial customs that I did a while back. When I posted this, I discovered that there are 2 distinct camps when it comes to fantasy fans. Those who are okay with firearms being in their, high fantasy worlds, and those who are just vehemently against it, who absolutely are like, firearms have no place in my fantasy. They don't fit at all. I thought it was kind of a cool thing. So it was around the time I had just started reading the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Now, I know a lot of people are huge fans of that series. I am not one of them. I enjoyed it. I didn't finish it. I haven't gotten through all of them. I probably read maybe 4 books, I think 3 or 4 books. Definitely enjoyed it, but I would not say that I'm a huge fan like some people are. But at the time, I was kind of heavily immersed in it, and I was really thinking a lot about gunslingers. So doing Mythic Legions customs, that's one of the things. Little side note, one of the things I love about looking at my past work in Mythic Legions customs, I'll look at figures I did, and it's almost like a time capsule. It'll almost remind me of where I was and what I was watching or reading or interested in at the time that I did that custom, because I genuinely do get inspired by things. And in this particular case, I got inspired by the gunslinger, and I said, what would, they call him, he's the gunslinger. I imagine him as being like a knight. I think at one point, do they refer to them as knights as one point? They might, or something. There was something that made me think of this. And once again, I had a Masters of the Universe Classics head that I could use to create this character. So this is my version of a Mythic Legions gunslinger. So this figure here uses a head, and that head is from a Masters of the Universe Classics Rio Blast, which is also a gunslinger type figure. So it was very appropriate here. But this uses a Sir Gideon Heavensbrand body, and it uses a coat that was from a Marvel Select Gambit figure. The belts in the guns all come from an old McFarlane Toys Billy the Kid figure, part of their Faces of Madness line, I believe it was. Something that I had many years ago that was in the fodder bin. And the guns are great. They worked well with this figure. I remember when I posted this, I kind of weathered him up a little bit, wanted to make him look like he was very much, been out there in the deserts and stuff. Okay, so people are saying they're descendants of King Arthur. Okay, yeah, so that makes sense. I think that's some of the stuff that I had read in those books that inspired this to do that. But this was one I did very early on, and I remember showing it, and it was like parting the sea, where there were 2 camps. Like I mentioned, there were some people that loved it and they thought it was really cool and really innovative. This is early days of Mythic Legions customizing. And there were other people that I remember the comments that it's like, those comments that people do where it's like they kind of want to criticize you, but they don't want to criticize you, so they almost give you like a backhanded compliment, where they're like, the execution of this is really good, but I hate it because guns don't belong in fantasy. And so it's kind of a funny comment where you're like, I don't know whether I should say thank you for telling me the execution is good, or to ignore you because you just said you hate it, or to debate whether or not guns should be in a fantasy setting. I don't know how to approach that. So I remember that and found it very funny. And I've said this before, that is definitely a way to see how the camps divide, is whether or not you will allow firearms in your fantasy. Yeah, so Curtis saying, you're surprised I did this because of the the Mythic Legions aesthetic. Yeah, no, it's a good point, Curtis. I am very big on that aesthetic. And Eric has actually said that he does not imagine firearms being in Mythic Legions. I do think that this uses at least enough Mythic Legions parts that it fits in with the Mythic Legions figures. So while I definitely would suggest that it's on the edge of that Mythic Legions aesthetic, I don't think it's so far away. At least it wasn't for me. I don't think it's so far away that it doesn't fit with my other figures. So cool. So building on that idea, I love when you think about knights, not only as just the way a character looks, just like, okay, they're an armored knight, but you can start to think about building on that armored look and building on the idea of heroic characters. I've talked about putting human heads on the knights to give them the unmasked looks. Well, you can put any head you want. You want to make an orc knight? I think that's super cool. I love the fact that in Mythic Legions, all the orcs are evil. You know why I love that? Because it opens up that door to say, what would the not evil orc or the not evil orc be like? When everyone's a bad guy from a certain race, it opens up that door for you to say, there's got to be at least one member of that race that is just like, you know what? I'm not down with all the pillaging. I don't want to do that. I just kind of want to chill. I just want to be a good guy. There's got to be a good guy orc out there, right? A good guy goblin, a good guy vampire. I love when you think about those, when you think about those historically evil characters and what a heroic version will look like. So you can pop an orc head on a knight body. You can pop a skeleton head. You can do all of that. I think it's a lot of fun. And that's one of the things that I've tried to think about as well is what would other races look like if they were knights? And not only like, yes, Balam. Balam's a great example where it's a knightly body that's got the cat head. That's super cool. But that is the same form factor as the other 1.0 knights. So I like when you start thinking about other form factors and how they would look as knights. And here's a couple examples of what I'm talking about. Let me find it here. So here is my take on both a dwarf knight and a goblin knight. And interestingly, they both use one key piece, and that is the visor from Brother Mandibulus. So that visor on the Brother Mandibulus figure, not only does it go up and down, but it is actually removable. Now, it is a piece that if you are going to remove it, I do suggest you be careful because it is fairly thin plastic. And if you pull it off and you bend it too much, you could risk cracking it. I certainly have cracked 1 and 2 in my day. However, it can pop off, and I think it works really, really well when you add it to other figures. So the dwarf that we see here on the right, this is on the left, that was one that I put together, which it's funny. There are customs that you sometimes do that you don't know where the inspiration comes from. And this was a figure that I knew he looked like something, but I could not remember what it was. And after I did this, like well after I did this, when I posted it, somebody actually said that it reminded them of the main character in the old video game Ghosts and Goblins. And as soon as they said it, I was like, oh, I never played that game. But that's where I had seen it. I'm like, that is totally what I, just subconsciously was inspired by to create this. But if you look at that figure, that is a Thord Ironjaw head. Interestingly, I got that from somebody else and it was missing the helmet. Someone had pulled the helmet off the Thord Ironjaw head. So I just had the head without the helmet piece. And those figures, while the helmets, you can pop them off, they're not meant to be removable. So the heads underneath the helmets, they're not something you can't display them like that. It's not like a dwarf head without the helmet on. It's just a weird looking shaped, insert piece underneath there. So what I did was I actually popped on a helmet from the skeleton soldier figure from Advent of Decay. It is a tight fit, but with a little bit of heat and determination, you can get it on. And that head is cool because it also has one of those bat ports. So I was able to put that plume in there to give him that knightly look. And because that head also has 2 ports on the sides where you're supposed to put helmet attachments, I was able to use those to kind of plug the little pegs of that visor into to create this look here. The rest of the body is just a warrior body that I swapped out his feet for some dwarf feet, gave it a little bit of dry brushed that sword, and that shield comes from a WWE Create a Superstar kind of like gladiator set. It's a wonderful set. It comes with like a helmet and a torch and that shield. It was floating around super cheap for a while, and I bought a number of them. Give it a little paint job, and it works great. On the right side here, we see a goblin figure, which is just a goblin Legion Builder body. It's got a little bit of weathering and paint dry brushed onto him. I used a Nubnik head. Nubnik is one of my favorite goblin heads, so expressive. Used that with that visor and that big plume that I repainted. And I gave him a couple weapons from a Lord of the Rings figure to create what I imagine a goblin knight would look like. But this is an example. This is an idea of how you can take different races and imagine, okay, what would a knightly version of that race look like? I think that's a lot of fun. I think that's a way that you can build on the idea of a knight, but get some really fresh looks in your collection, especially if, the other side of that, if you're really into dwarves or you're really into goblins and you want some different looks of those races, saying what would a knightly version of that race look like? That's a lot of fun too. So a couple more to look at here, and then we will call it an evening, right? What else do I got? Let's see. So this is another one that I posted this week that I'm excited about this one. This is one I really liked a lot. And this was an update of a custom I did quite some time ago. And it really, really started with that head. So that head, it's an old head, and it's an example of a figure you don't see around very much. When I showed the Knight Gunslinger, a lot of people here who are Motu fans recognized it as Real Blast. Even when I showed my Prince early on, a lot of people recognized that as being Bo. Those are heads that people certainly recognize. This is a head that whenever I show it, people are like, where is that gorgeous head from? And it's actually a head that my friend Joe Vassapolo got for me quite some time ago from a very underproduced line called Stan Winston's Blood Wolves. So a number of years ago, Stan Winston, the famous, creature creator who gave us so many movie monsters like, Predator, and many, many others. He did a number of different toy lines. Stan Winston's Mutant Earth, Stan Winston's Realm of the Claw. That's a popular one, right? You've seen me use those feline-like figures in parts. You've seen Nikki use them. A lot of other customizers. Stan Winston, Realm of the Claw, probably the most popular, the most prevalent of his lines. But there were others as well. The Blood Wolves was definitely, seemingly less produced than those others. Then they hit a whole Gargoyles line that is virtually impossible to find these days. If you can find those, certainly in package, they're very expensive. But the Blood Wolves line, there was one figure in that line that I really, really liked, and it was a character called Veridicus. It was a fully armored vampire. Now, like a lot of those Stan Winston figures, they suffered on articulation and they moved very, very well, but sculpturally they looked really, really nice. And this Veridicus figure came with this wonderful helmet. It just happens to be the exact colors of the Red Shield Soldier. So all I did here, I took that Red Shield Soldier, I gave him a couple swords, I popped this head on, the head was Dremel to fit. I also used that loin piece from the same Veridicus figure just to get a little bit of a different look. And then I topped it off with that crazy looking lance that is offered at legionshop.com. And that is actually from my friend Steven of Detour Customs. So this is a piece, he had sent me this actually even before Legion Shop opened. He sent me this as a sample piece. And he sent me, I've shown before the regular kind of jousting lance that he did. I have that ironically with another Red Shield Soldier on top of my Balius horse with the awesome horse covering the caparison that Strupp Family Crafts did. It makes a perfect looking like traditional knight jousting character. But he also sent me this big, crazy one. And I honestly had no idea what I was going to do with it. It reminded me, there's a video game I believe called Soul Calibur where like the design of a lot of the weapons, they're just crazy oversized, like huge swords. Never been into that aesthetic. Not my thing at all. This kind of had that kind of like oversized Soul Calibur feel to me where it was a little bit over the top. And I wasn't sure how I was going to use it, but I've said this before. I love having stuff that you don't know how you're going to use in your fodder bin, because there will come a day where you put a piece together and you're like, it's missing something. And it's like this magic moment where they come together, right? If you've ever talked to anyone that does through hiking, long distance hikes like Appalachian Trail or Pacific Coast Crest Trail, there's something they refer to called trail magic, where it's almost like in that moment where you need a pick me up, you need something, just something amazing happens. You meet somebody that inspires you, that gives you something you need, that whatever it would be. I was reading a kind of a book, a story about a thru hiker on the AT that got to that point and they met someone, a couple, and they were talking about, they were changing stories. And that couple was like, you know what, we're heading into the city, back into town. We don't need these. And he handed the guy like 5 bagels, which if you're doing a thru hike, getting something like that, that's awesome. They call it trail magic. And I've often thought of this synergy being kind of the action figure customizing equivalent of trail magic, where you're looking at a figure that's done and you're like, he just needs something else. And then you go in your fodder bin and it's almost like a light shines down and you're like, this is the piece. And as soon as I put it in, I was like, that is cool. I loved the way it looked. The colors matched and I just loved the way that it broke down for me. Great piece from Steven. And obviously, this thing has a secret, because underneath that helmet, that visor actually flips up to reveal this head underneath. I said it was from Stan Winston's Blood Wolves. That's because the entire series is werewolf based. So this character, I love the fact that if you put that visor down, it very much looks like a heroic knight figure, but you pull that visor up and it gives you that reveal that this is actually a Lycan, werewolf, whatever you want to call it, type character. Very, very cool. And it's such an incredibly smooth little like transition here. Just pops right up. Absolutely dig how that looks. So again, you can start thinking about knights in terms of not only what would different characters look, what would different races look. Almost everything we've looked at tonight are just heroic knights. There's a whole other side of knights when you start getting into evil knights, when you start getting into knights that are corrupted, or even the last one I'll show here tonight, when you start getting into, something I've shown a number of times before, evil knights like vampire knights. This is a very popular one that I did years ago. This is my vampire knight that I called Sir Dulac, which this uses some purple armor from a Keltis figure. Remember, I've said this many times, I tend to not display the Motu tributes as Motu figures. So when I got the Keltis figure and he had that wonderful purple armor, I was like, what am I going to do with that armor? I loved the way that armor looked with the black legs, the black upper arms and upper legs from a Black Knight Legion builder. So that's what this uses. The head on this is actually the staff attachment that comes with Keltis. It wasn't even really meant to be an alternate head. It was meant to go on his staff. But I took that head, I painted that detail on the mask black, gave it some of those bat wings, gave it a plastic cape. Curtis is asking, what is it from? Curtis, I honestly do not know. That cape, I've bought fodder lots many, many times over the years that are just assorted pieces. There was one time that I found a lot on eBay a few years ago that was just dozens and dozens of plastic capes and like skirt pieces and swords and everything. And that's where that cape came from. I, to this day, am not sure where it actually originated from, but it's got a really cool kind of tattered look to it. Kind of looks like it's a little windswept, and especially that stylized photo you see on the right, I think it gives it that really strong sense that I was looking for with this figure. So that's a whole other category that I'm going to stop at because it kind of sets us up for maybe part 2 of this down the road, right? We've looked at all of these night customs. We've just spent an hour looking at night customs, and we just started talking about evil knights, right? Everything we've looked at was more of the heroic variety. So there's a whole other set of knights that we can think about when we start thinking about corrupted knights or undead knights and zombie knights and all of these wonderful ways that we can take that idea of a knight and corrupt it and flip it on its head and do other creative things with it. Very, very cool. Thank you all for joining me this evening. We're at 9 o'clock right now. So Jay Tilly is saying the cape is a shredder cape. What shredder did it come from? Was that like one of the, I was gonna say it was one of the Playmates lines, but so many turtles are Playmates. It seems more recently that so many other companies have come up with turtles. So I have to assume it's an old Playmates shredder figure. Very cool. Oh, and Anthony, good night, my friend. I see what you did there, buddy. Good night, all. Wow, you guys are all just been hanging on to these puns for the end of the show, right? Awesome. 2012 Shredder. Very cool. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate it. So with that, I am going to call it an evening. Thank you all very much. I will be back here next week. Same Mythic time, same Mythic channel. Unless something changes between now and then, I am expecting a big show next week. I'm expecting some interviews. I'm expecting to have some guests on here. I'm expecting to have some exciting things to talk about. I'm expecting to have some things to reveal. Until then, I'll see you then. Can't wait for that conversation. You all have a good night. Stay safe.